Good afternoon. And excuse me, but somewhere along the line, this horse came to my throat. My mother would tell you it's an elephant. She's 92, so she doesn't have horses anymore. She has elephants for some reason. Many of you I know. I've known for some of you for more years than I'd like to remember. I've been around county government for a long time. I started in county government back in 1979. I was just a child. Hey, David, where'd he go? He didn't show me how to move this power. Oh, that's how we move the PowerPoint. For those of you that are brand new to it, I welcome you in. County government is a passion for me, as you can well tell. I was crazy enough to be a county auditor in 2 different counties, and when I left county government, I took a job where I still get to work with county government officials, so that's a good thing. What we're going to go over with today is the role that all of you have, no matter what office you're in. You have a role in the budget process and the final aspects, the financial aspects in county government. While some offices have a much larger role, every elected official is responsible for their own budget and keeping track of their own budget. The annual budget is a financial plan of the county, and while you work a budget within a year, it's really an 18-month process, and it begins sometime in May, and the budget process runs from July of one year through December of the next. I'm not going to read this PowerPoint, and if you have questions as we're going along, go ahead and ask your questions as we're going and not wait till the end. Questions and answers, it works better. The financial body of the county is the county council. And they establish those budgets and give the authority of what each individual department can spend out of each of their individual funds. They also set the amount of wages and how many people each department can have in their department. The county auditor is that fiscal officer of the county, and everything that's paid from the county must go through the county auditor's office. She tracks all of the monies within each fund, and she tracks all of the appropriations and how much is left and has been expended from those appropriations. She starts the disbursements of all the checks, and all checks require 2 signatures, that of the county auditor and the county treasurer. One thing I want to caution you as new elected officials is you want to be very careful about putting your signature and thinking about putting your signature as an electronic signature in your software system. You've heard a lot about fraud over the past several years, fraud in county government, fraud in city government. When that electronic signature is in that software signature, please remember that anyone can write a check with your signature on it. While it takes 2, when one signature is in there, someone else can write a check with that other signature. So just be cautious about how the signatures are used and when one is in and when somebody else's is in, whether you want your signature in there or whether you don't want your electronic signature in your software. Just think about it. The county treasurer is the holder of the funds, and they bank the funds and they invest the funds with the assistance of the County Board of Finance. The treasurer is the secretary to the Board of Finance, and they meet annually sometime in January. They also balance their cash book with the bank on a monthly basis. The county commissioners, while they have a small role in the financial side, they are the executive body. They do establish the purchasing policies of the county, and they can recommend salaries of all of the elected officials or all of the employees in the county They don't establish them, and they don't establish the positions, but they can make recommendations. The establishment is set by the council, and they must approve the claims paid except for the court. Okay? You'll see on this first page that there are websites for the different county manuals, and I just updated these. These are the current websites, and they change periodically of the manuals. These county manuals can answer a lot of questions for you. They are the basic step-by-steps, and they can direct you to what you can and cannot do, what funds require appropriations, what don't, the step-by-steps of budgets, the process of claims. They give you a lot of information for both the county, the auditor, and the treasurer. There are some, oh, yes.
You said that the treasurer balances the cash in the bank with the cash book money.
Correct.
What if that doesn't happen?
It's to be overseen that it's done. I mean, she's in violation of her office if she doesn't do that. She should,
What recourse does a county council person have?
then they would need to go to the county commissioners and set a process and meet with the county treasurer and set a process in place. The thing you would want to do is meet with your county treasurer, find out why it's not happening, and work with them to set a process in place of what you need to do to get that to start balancing. Okay? It would be a joint effort to get it working together. There's some budget terminology you all need to have, and of course you've met the State Board of Accounts and the Department of Local Government Finance earlier today, but some of the terminology gets a little confusing through the budget process because we have different units of government. We have a taxing unit, which is a unit of government that has the ability to set a tax rate, such as a city, a township, or a library. Then we have a taxing district, and the taxing district is a combination of several units that makes a total rate that sets that tax rate, such as the entire rate. So it has a county rate, a township rate, a library rate, and a school rate. And that district rate is the one that affects the circuit breaker. It's when that rate gets to a point that it affects those circuit breaker losses. So you have a unit that sets its budget, and those units compiled together set a tax district rate, and that tax district rate is the rate that affects those units, or those circuit breakers. And when that circuit breaker gets over that $2 mark and that $3 mark, that's when your circuit breaker losses start beginning to grow, and you have loss of revenue. The levy that you all hear about is the amount of taxes to be collected every year. So when someone says something about your levy, that's the total amount of dollars that you're going to collect as a county, as a school, as a township. Each individual taxing unit has its own levy. The net assessed values are the combination of all of the assessed values minus any deductions, mortgage deduction, age deduction, blind deduction. So it's the total gross assessed value minus all of those deductions is your net assessed value. To determine the tax rate, you take the levy, the amount of taxes that's going to be collected, divide it by the assessed value, and divide that by 100, and that's how you come out with a tax rate. So each individual taxing unit takes how many dollars they want to collect, they divide it by their net assessed value, and then they divide that by 100, and that's how they come up with their unit rate. You then combine all those unit rates, and you come up with the tax rate. In years past, before we had the circuit breaker, The amount of, the combination of all of them wasn't really of effect. It didn't hurt anybody. But now that we have circuit breakers, it makes a difference what the school is doing and what the townships are doing as far as debt's concerned, because the combination of them together now put us over those $2 and $3 and create those circuit breaker losses. The maximum levy is the amount that's the maximum that each taxing unit can charge, can collect. This went into effect back in 1973 when Governor Bowen, long when I was just a baby, decided that property taxes were getting out of control. And so he put on what he called a frozen levy. He was freezing the levy at that point and decided that this is the place we were stopping and that taxes were only going to be able to grow at a specific amount every year after that. And that's when the income tax came into play and property tax relief came into play. And I've got the statute there that tells you about it. Any questions? We have several different types of funds. We have a levy-controlled fund. That is just what it is. It's the levy. It's the amount you're collecting divided by the assessed value, and that's a levy-controlled. It's the tax rate divided by the levy. We have a rate-controlled fund, which is your cum rates. When you adopt cum bridge or cum capital development or cum courthouse, you set a specific rate for that as a county commissioners. You set a rate. And that rate is then multiplied by the net assessed value. That is a rate-driven fund. Debt service funds are those funds that are driven by the amount of debt. And you can only collect enough in a debt service fund to pay the debt for that year. So if your debt payment is $2 million, you can only collect $2 million that year. You cannot collect $4 million in the debt service fund and put money aside. The property tax caps are 1, 2, and 3. 1 is for homesteaded property that's owner occupied. 2% is for the non-homesteaded residential property and ag land, and 3 is for commercial and industrial property. The circuit breaker credit is that credit which is those properties above and beyond that 1%, 2%, or 3% rate. An appropriation is that amount of money that's authorized by the county council to be spent for any given particular service. We have 4 categories that the county council, oh, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, can you explain the circuit breaker and you say above and beyond? What does that mean?
Okay, if we have an area where the tax rate is $2.25, and we have a gross assessed value of for easy sake, $1,000, and we multiply that 1,000 times the 225. Anything over $2, the 25 cents worth will be a circuit breaker loss because they can only pay 2% of their taxes. Anything over 2% is lost revenue. They get a credit for that. If they are residential or ag land, okay? If they're business, they would pay the whole 225. Money you can't charge. It's a rate you can't charge. If you are a non-homesteaded residential, which is rental property, it's residential land that's not owner occupied, is what that is, and or ag land. And so all of your farmland that has a tax rate applied to it over $2, the 25 cents times that $1,000 is credited off. And that's money that the county will never collect. It's lost revenue. Does that help? And if it's in an industrial park and the tax rate is over $3, then anything over $3 is lost revenue for both the non-residential and the commercial. So if you have a house sitting in the city that's a rental property, and the tax rate in the city is $3.50, $1.50 of that property tax is circuit breaker loss. And for against that property, for every $100. Does that help? Okay. Yes.
Okay, question. I understand about the caps and all that very well, but who takes the loss if we have a circuit breaker loss? Which taxing unit?
They all do.
Is it spread proportionally?
It's spread proportionally, yes, because the loss comes off of each individual tax bill, and then what is collected is apportioned out by the tax rate. So everybody gets the loss. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's equally distributed. The only thing that doesn't take the loss are the debt funds. The debt funds. And debt is protected. The debt funds are protected because you have to collect enough to pay your debt. So if you have a unit of government that has debt, those debt funds are protected. Like school debt or a building, the library has debt or the county has debt. Those debt funds are protected.
And another question, in relation to that, with the residential, it's a 1% cap. Is there very many places in Indiana where they're going over that?
There are a few, but there are very little because of the supplemental. Can everybody hear his question? I'm sorry. He's asking if there are very many places where on the 1%, if there's very much that has a circuit breaker loss in Indiana. There are a few, but very few that have a loss on the circuit breaker in the 1%, and that's because they get the $45,000 and then they get the additional supplemental credit or deduction also. So they get so much deduction off of that assessed value to start with. When you take it against the gross, the 1% is against the gross, and you get so much off of the gross, their net assessed value is so low that there's not much 1% circuit breaker loss. There's some, but it's a really expensive house to get it. Any other questions? Okay. The classifications in the budget process are 1,000 is personal services, 2 is supplies, and supplies are the things that you can hold on to. 3 is other services, and those are things that telephone, utilities, those things you can't hold on to, and 4 are capital purchases or desks, equipments, vehicles. Here's the one thing that's really important to know, the difference between a fund and an appropriation. And this is the one thing that everybody really needs to pound in their head, because this is the thing that can get an auditor and a treasurer in big trouble if they don't. And if you're new to the world, to county government world, please, if you remember nothing else from today, please remember this. The fund is the money. That's the cash in the bank. The appropriation is the check. That's what you spend. If you don't have the money in the bank, you can have all of the appropriations in the world, but you can't spend them without the money in the bank. They're two total different things. And people get really, really confused and say, well, it says I have money in my appropriation. Well, you might, but the revenue hasn't come in yet. They're two total different things. Yes.
I appreciate you saying that because my 12 years of being chief deputy auditor and treasurer, one thing that I commonly have to explain to people, the difference between a statutory fund and a sub-fund underneath the statutory fund, such as the general fund, where it may have money in it, but the appropriation that you want to spend it on, the money's already been laid out, and if we ask for additional appropriation above and beyond, realize there may be things that become unfunded because we're spending things. All right, what I'm trying to say is, funds and sub-funds, once you have a fund, and there's so much money in there, and you can ask for additional appropriations if it's in there, but there may come an emergency that you have to spend the money on something else, right? Am I saying this correctly? So, if people can get in their mind a difference between a sub-fund and a statutory fund, when you go to do the appropriations, there may be a different statutory fund that's more appropriate to spend, to make an additional appropriation out of. So can you say that in a better term, because I always have a hard time explaining that. What's the most appropriate way to like if there's an emergency, to come up with how, the funds.
Yeah, well, if I get what you're saying, the big thing is you can have all the appropriations in the world, but if there's not cash in the fund, you can't spend it. And a fund is the cash, and the appropriation is only the authority to spend. And when you come in and when people come in, they say, well, I have cash in my fund. The appropriation is not a fund. The appropriation is only an appropriation and the authority to spend. And if the money is not in the fund that the treasurer shows in her office, you can't spend it. And those are two totally separate words. Cash is the fund, the authority to spend is the appropriation, and that's very, very important. And it happens more in the smaller funds, I don't want to say the health fund, and funds that don't have big property tax dollars in it. It happens more in those than it naturally does in general fund. But even the general fund, there are times when payroll has to come out and something else needs to sit and wait for payroll to come out before you can spend something that you want to buy. There's a need for payroll at a time when it's close to tax draw or close to the end of the year. So I think what she's trying to say is, yeah, right. So if there's not cash in the fund, you can't spend the appropriation, and that's very, very important to know for everybody. And it's not a fun thing, but if you learn nothing else, my main thing is the fund is the cash and the appropriation is the authority to spend, and those are two important words to keep separate from today. Current budget year is the one we're in, and ensuing budget year is the one we're working in during the budget process. So the current year right now is 2016, ensuing year would be 2017, where we are right now. And you guys are going to have to watch me on time because I feel like I'm going slow. The budget calendar is changing as we speak. There's a lot going on in the budget calendar year. It starts in May. We now have till the end of October to adopt it. There are a lot of changes happening in the budget calendar with legislation that took place last year. Different certifications are going on. The DLGF is doing some of the certifying that the auditors used to do. Assessed value rules are changing of when the assessor has to get assessed values to the auditor. The auditor's assessed value deadline is sooner now than it used to be. The Department of Revenue has different dates of when they have to get things to the DLGF. The DLGF has different dates of when they have to certify to the county auditor and to the taxing units. So a lot of dates are changing, but the process begins sometime in May and June, and you should get something from your county auditor in roughly that time frame to start working on your budgets and asking for what you think you're going to need. And you need to be honest about that. Don't just ask for the moon just because they've always cut it. Ask for what you really think you're going to need, and then just get with your council people and justify what you're asking, what you need. You know, tell them what you need. Don't just pad it. Try to get the budget. I've heard in lots of places, and I've been in your shoes, both as a recorder and an auditor. So I've been on both sides of that budget process. But justify what you need. Get off of the thing where, well, they'll just cut it. They'll just cut it. You know, because it's getting so difficult and monies are getting so tight, we need to submit honest budgets and get to where the council doesn't have to make so many cuts. These are just dates of when things need to be. Come on. These are new revenue terms, and I've just kind of tried to compare revenue terms, new verbiage to old verbiage. We've went from CAGIT and COIT and CEDIT or EDIT, whichever you called it, and LOIT, public safety, to LIT. This year it was known as LIT certified shares and LIT certified shares for CAGIT and LIT certified shares for COIT. And in 2018, it's just going to be called LIT. Like I said, the budgeting world is in a major change. Financial institution tax is still something that's out there, but it's now been put in our levy that the DLGF is certifying to us. They certify our maximum levy. But as a county auditor, you still need to know what that growth quotient is, which they certify, and you still need to calculate and make sure that what they're certifying to you is correct, because they can make mistakes too. So even though the numbers are being certified to you, I encourage you to still do your own calculations. And if you don't know how to do that calculation, get with someone who knows how to do those calculations and find out how. Your field rep with the DLGF can help you with it. Other county auditors who in the past have. We can answer questions for you, and my information is on the last page. But financial institution tax comes from the Department of Revenue and is part of your major revenue stream. These income taxes are now going to be, in 2018, one major income tax that beginning in 2017, the county councils, as of July 1st, will determine how they're to be distributed, whether they're to be distributed as property tax relief, edit monies, or public safety monies. And so what I've done on this page, and I'm not going to read them all to you, is just put the old verbiage with the new verbiage, and next year there'll be a new PowerPoint. No, not next year, 2 years, there'll be a new PowerPoint that will show they're all just lit. Any questions? Because this one is there'll be lots of new things when you go to your conferences. Okay, we kind of touched on this one, but there are reports that can give you updates. And I think someone asked me in the hall earlier, how can I find these reports? These are some reports that can be ran for county councils monthly, and commissioners too, that can tell you where you are in the budget process. And elected officials in your offices, you can ask for these reports too. But they tell you where you are in your budget process throughout the year. I've listed the two major vendors for financials. And these are the main reports. But there's a budget status report, and there's a summary of balances by object location that you can request from your auditor, that will tell you what your original appropriation was, how much you've spent, and what the balance is of it. They can run it for just your department, and they can run it for the county general fund or any fund that's within any department. This can be run monthly, or it can be run year to date. If an appropriation becomes insufficient, the county auditor is not to write any more checks from it. She's not to disperse any, he or she is not to be dispersing any money from it. And you have two options. You can either transfer into that appropriation, or you can do an additional. And this just tells you the steps to do those. But if you bring a claim in and there's no money in that appropriation, the county auditor needs to say no, because it's a must. I don't know what I hit here. Oh, quit it. Everybody has a role in the expenditure part of the claims too, and you as an elected official should be filling out your claims yourself. It's your responsibility. Did I skip one? I did, but that's okay. It's your responsibility to fill out your claims, provide an original invoice, and make sure that that invoice is correct. And I say original invoice because if you don't use an original invoice to pay from, you could be paying the same claim twice. You could be paying the same invoice twice if you're not using the original. And that's happened. So you should fill out whatever claim your county uses, whatever process you use, and there's different ones. Check to make sure it's good, fill it out, sign it, and tell the auditor what account line, appropriation line, you want that invoice paid from. That's every department head and elected official's responsibility. The responsibility of the county auditor is to make sure she receives that claim voucher with the original invoice. And when I say invoice, that is not the statement from a Visa card. Not a statement, but an invoice. Review it, make sure that everything is good, it's on the right rate, no penalties have been charged, compute the amounts, verify it, and then it goes into the system with the docket. It's approved by the commissioners. Make sure there's enough in the appropriation. And I've got your code sites here to back you up on it. Then the commissioners approve the docket. There are a few funds here that the commissioners don't approve. They don't approve the sheriff's commissary funds or the clerk's trust funds. However, the commissioners have a right to audit those funds anytime. You just need to ask. Here are a few other financial duties that we have. The executive may audit the accounts of an officer who deal with the monies belonging to or appropriated for the benefit of the county. At a regular meeting in January of each year, the executive and the county treasurer shall make a settlement for the preceding calendar year, and a copy of the settlement sheet shall be copied in the order of the executive. Now, the problem with that is, that's the annual report. No, I'm sorry, that's the treasurer's. The Board of Commissioners, along with the county treasurer, serve on the local Board of Finance. And the Board of Finance shall meet the first Monday before the last day of January. They elect a president, they review the investment report, and they review the investment policy. This is the one that's got a problem, and I don't think it's been fixed yet. At the second regular meeting each year, the executive shall make an accurate statement of the county's receipts and expenditures. However, the county's annual report's not due until the end of February. So they just do it when you get your report done. I did miss one, and let me go back here because this is kind of an important one, encumbrances. This is one I get questions on. Encumbrances are expenses that get incurred one year and move forward and didn't get paid. In order to do a legal encumbrance, you must have either a contract or an invoice dated in the current year by December 31st, and there must be an existing appropriation in the current year that you can move forward. And then in January of the next year, you can request the appropriation of that for that from the council for that bill, for that invoice. But it must be dated before December 31st, and the appropriation must be in place. You can't go back and fix it. Also, when you encumber it, that money can only be spent for that specific invoice. You cannot encumber money for one invoice and spend it on something else. If you don't spend it on that invoice, you don't spend it. Did I go over my time? Any questions? My voice held out. She asked if there's a time constraint on that, on the encumbrances. I don't know that there's one statutorial, but if it's not done before the budget time, it definitely wouldn't be able to be done because you report it as part of your budget. So I think the council needs to set something. I, as an auditor, got my council to require a date that they wanted them and when they were going to act on them. And the council, that's pretty much a council's duty to set it. Thank you all for listening. Welcome, and we'll see you soon.